Kyle Murphy stood in the grimy cargo bay of Mars Station 7 and stared at the delivery manifest on his cracked datapad with growing suspicion, because in his 5 years as a courier for Starbound delivery services, nothing had ever been simple, and nothing had ever gone according to plan. The manifest said the package contained rare moonflowers from the gardens of Titan being shipped to a collector on Europa, which sounded legitimate enough. But Kyle had learned through painful experience that legitimate-sounding jobs were usually the ones that got him into the most trouble. He looked at the silver container sitting on the loading platform. It was small, about the size of a travel case, and covered in warning labels that said fragile and temperature-sensitive and handle with extreme care. Kyle walked around it twice, checking for anything unusual. The seals looked intact, and the temperature gauge showed it was maintaining the right environment for delicate plants. His ship, the Rusty Arrow, sat in the docking bay behind him, leaking a thin stream of coolant from a pipe he could not afford to fix, and making a grinding noise that the mechanic said would cost 3 months' salary to repair. Kyle needed this delivery job. He needed the credits to keep flying and to keep eating and to maybe someday fix all the things that were broken on his ship. He picked up the silver container and carried it carefully into his cargo hold, where he strapped it down with magnetic clamps and checked the restraints 3 times, because he always checked everything 3 times when his luck was involved. The container hummed softly when he touched it, which was probably just the temperature control system, but it made him nervous anyway. Kyle walked back to the cockpit and dropped into his pilot seat, which had stuffing coming out of one armrest and a seatbelt that only worked on the left side. He ran through his pre-flight checks and listened to his navigation computer boot up with a series of beeps and clicks that did not sound healthy. "Welcome, pilot," the computer said in a voice that sounded like an old professor. "Today we journey across the vast darkness, and I am reminded of the ancient words about roads less traveled and promises to keep." Kyle had bought the ship cheap from a salvage dealer, and the navigation computer had come preloaded with some kind of poetry program that he could not figure out how to remove. He ignored it like he ignored most of the ship's problems and focused on the launch sequence. Mars Station 7 cleared him for departure, and Kyle fired the engines, which coughed twice before engaging properly. The Rusty Arrow lifted off the pad and turned toward the black. Kyle set course for Europa, which was a 3-day journey through the inner system, and settled back in his seat to wait. Space travel was mostly waiting. Waiting for the ship to reach jump points, and waiting for clearance from traffic control, and waiting for the autopilot to make the thousands of tiny course corrections needed to avoid asteroids and debris. Kyle passed the time reading old adventure novels on his datapad and eating reconstituted meals that tasted like cardboard. 3 hours into the flight, he was reading about ancient Earth explorers when he heard a sound from the cargo hold, a soft thump like something had shifted. Kyle frowned and unbuckled from his seat. The cargo container should not be moving, because he had checked those restraints 3 times and the artificial gravity was stable. He walked back to the cargo hold and stopped in the doorway. The silver container was glowing, not just the temperature gauge, but the whole thing pulsing with a soft blue light that got brighter and dimmer in a steady rhythm like breathing. Kyle approached it slowly, because glowing packages were never good news in his experience. The container hummed louder now, and the sound had a pattern to it, almost like words. He leaned closer and heard a voice, small and muffled, but definitely a voice coming from inside the container. "Please help me," the voice said. "I cannot breathe in here much longer." Kyle froze. He had 3 rules that he followed religiously as a courier. Never open the packages, because that was how you ended up in prison. Never ask questions about the packages, because knowing things made you responsible for them. Never get involved with what was inside the packages, because involvement led to complications, and complications led to disasters. But the voice sounded young and scared, and it was saying it could not breathe. Kyle had bad luck, but he was not the kind of person who could walk away from someone who needed help. He reached for the container's emergency release latch and hesitated with his fingers on the mechanism. If he opened this, he would be breaking contract and probably breaking several laws. If he opened this, his already terrible luck would certainly get worse. The voice inside the container made a small, frightened sound. Kyle pulled the latch. The container's lid hissed and popped open, and cool air rushed out, smelling like flowers and something else he could not identify. He lifted the lid fully and looked inside. A girl sat curled up in the container, looking up at him with enormous eyes. She had pointed ears that swept back from her head and skin that seemed to glow with its own internal light like she was made of starlight. Her hair was silver and moved slightly, even though there was no breeze. She wore a dress that looked like it was woven from moonbeams. An elf. Kyle had seen pictures of elves in history files and entertainment programs, but he had never seen one in person because they rarely left their worlds in the Andromeda colonies. The girl was small, maybe only 3 feet tall, and she looked exhausted. "Thank you," she said, and her voice sounded like bells ringing. "I thought I would die in that box." Kyle opened his mouth to ask what was happening, but before he could speak, something else moved in the container. A small head poked up from beneath the girl's arm. It had scales that shimmered blue and green and eyes that glowed like small fire's wings unfolded, made of something that looked like stained glass. A dragon, tiny, enough to fit in Kyle's hand. But definitely, a dragon with smoke curling from its nostrils and small sharp teeth visible when it yawned. The elf girl stood up in the container, and the dragon climbed onto her shoulder where it wrapped its tail around her neck and stared at Kyle with obvious suspicion. "I am Princess Lyra of the Silver Woods," she said. "And this is Ember, my bonded companion. We have been kidnapped by enemies of my family and locked in this container to be sold to collectors on Europa. You have just saved our lives." Kyle Murphy. Kyle wondered how she knew his name and then realized his name tag was still clipped to his jacket. He also wondered how his simple delivery job had just turned into an intergalactic incident involving royalty. His bad luck had struck again, but looking at the small elf princess and her dragon, he realized that for once he did not mind. Princess Lyra climbed out of the silver container with surprising grace for someone who had been trapped inside it for hours, and Ember, the tiny dragon, launched from her shoulder to fly circles around the cargo hold, breathing small puffs of blue flame that left trails of light in the air. Kyle stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened, because opening a package and finding kidnapped royalty was beyond even his usual terrible luck. The princess stretched her arms over her head, and her whole body seemed to glow brighter for a moment, like she was recharging from some internal battery. "That container was supposed to keep me unconscious until delivery," she said, looking at Kyle with those color-shifting eyes. "But I am stronger than my enemies believed, and I managed to stay awake long enough to call for help. I am grateful you heard me." Human Kyle found his voice finally. "I am Kyle," he said, "and I think I just made a very big mistake." Lyra tilted her head, and her silver hair moved. "Like water, you saved me from being sold to criminals," she said. "How is that a mistake because I was supposed to deliver you?" He said, "I am a courier and you were my package, and now I have broken contract." And probably about 6 different laws. Ember flew over and landed on Kyle's shoulder, which surprised him because the little dragon had been glaring at him with suspicion just moments before. The dragon was warm, and its claws were sharp, but it did not hurt him. It just perched there and made a small, chirping sound. Lyra smiled. "Ember likes you," she said. "Dragons can sense the character of people, and he would not sit on your shoulder if you were not trustworthy." Kyle looked at the small dragon. "Trust me," he said to Ember. "I am the least trustworthy person to be around because bad things happen to me constantly." Ember chirped again, and a small puff of smoke came from its nostrils. The princess walked toward the cargo hold exit, peering around at the rusty walls and flickering lights with curiosity. "Your ship is very old," she said. "Yes." Kyle agreed. "It barely flies, but it is all I can afford." She turned back to him. "Then we must make sure you get paid for delivering me safely," she said. "My mother will reward you greatly for returning me home." Kyle shook his head. "Europa is where I was taking you originally, but now I know you are a kidnapped princess. I cannot just hand you over to whoever ordered this delivery. That person is probably one of your enemies." Lyra's expression grew serious. "You are correct. She said the manifest would have led you to a criminal named Victor Cross who deals in rare items including stolen royalty. If you had delivered me without knowing what was in the container, you would have been innocent, but now that you know, you are involved whether you like it or not." Kyle felt his stomach sink because getting involved was exactly what he had been trying to avoid. His entire career, Ember shifted on his shoulder and made a sound that might have been sympathy. "What do I do?" he asked Lyra. Walked closer, and despite being only 3 feet tall, she somehow had a presence that made her seem much larger. "You take us to Europa," she said. but not to Victor Cross. You take us to the Andromeda Embassy where my people have representatives. They will protect us and pay you and make sure you face no legal trouble for breaking your contract. Kyle thought about this. The Andromeda Embassy was in the Royal District of Europa, which was heavily guarded and full of security checkpoints. Getting there would be complicated, but leaving Lyra and Ember to be captured by criminals would be worse. All right, he said, I will take you to the embassy. Lyra reached up and touched his hand with her small fingers. Thank you, Kyle Murphy, she said. You have a good heart, despite your claims of bad luck. Ember chirped agreement and launched off Kyle's shoulder to fly back to Lyra. Kyle led them to the cockpit where Lyra immediately became fascinated with all the controls and screens. She climbed into the co-pilot seat, which was too large for her and had to sit on the edge to see the displays. What is this? She asked, pointing at the navigation computer. That is my navigation system, Kyle said. It gives directions and helps plot courses. It also quotes poetry because I cannot figure out how to turn that off. As if summoned by his words, the computer beeped. We are steady on course, the computer said, like ships upon the midnight sea seeking harbor. And home. Lyra laughed and the sound filled the cockpit with warmth. Like your ship, she said. It has personality. Kyle sat in his pilot seat and checked their trajectory. They were still 2 days from Europa, which meant 2 days of traveling with a kidnapped princess and her dragon. 2 days for things to go wrong. He glanced at Lyra, who was examining everything with wonder, and Ember, who was perched on the dashboard cleaning its wings. Maybe this time his bad luck had brought him something good instead of disaster. The thought lasted exactly 5 minutes. That was when the proximity alarm started screaming. Kyle looked at the scanner and felt his heart drop. 3 ships had appeared behind them, moving fast and broadcasting on military frequencies. They were sleek and dangerous-looking, painted black with no identification. Markings pirates, or more accurately, the people who had kidnapped Lyra coming to retrieve their stolen property. Lyra saw the ships on the display and her glowing skin went pale. They found us, she whispered. How is that possible? Kyle was already pulling up the ship's defensive systems, which consisted of basic shields and exactly 2 emergency flares because he could not afford weapons. They must have put a tracker in the container, he said. They knew when you were opened. The lead pirate ship broadcast a message that came through the cockpit speaker's courier vessel. You are carrying stolen property. The voice said. Stop your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction. Ember growled and smoke poured from its nostrils. Kyle looked at his instruments and calculated the distance to Europa. They would never make it. The pirate ships were too fast. Lyra gripped the edge of her seat. I will not let you die because of me. She said, if you surrender me, they will let you go. Kyle surprised himself by laughing. Princess, he said, you do not know much about pirates. They do not leave witnesses. He pushed the throttle forward, and the rusty arrow shuddered and accelerated. If we are going down, he said, we are going down fighting. Ember spread its wings and roared a sound much bigger than its small body should have been able to make. Lyra looked at Kyle with something like respect. You truly have a good heart, she said. Now let us see if we can survive this. The rusty arrow shook as weapons fire streaked past the cockpit windows, leaving trails of light in the darkness of space, and Kyle threw the ship into a spiral that made his artificial gravity flicker and sent loose items floating through the cabin. Lyra gripped her seat with both hands, but she was smiling. Like this was the most exciting thing she had experienced in weeks. Ember flew through the cockpit, doing loops and breathing small jets of flame that hung in the air where gravity had failed. Kyle pulled the ship back into a straight line and gravity returned with a thump that dropped everything back to the floor. The pirate ships were gaining fast, 3 against 1, and their weapons were fully charged while Kyle had nothing but basic shields that were already showing stress fractures on the display. You fly very well, the princess said. Have you been in many battles? Kyle dodged another blast. I have been in exactly 0 battles on purpose, he said, but I have run away from trouble many times, and running away requires good flying. The navigation computer beeped calmly despite the chaos and peril. We find courage, it said, like ancient warriors facing impossible odds. Not helping, Kyle muttered. He checked the scanner and saw that Europa was still 8 hours away at top speed. They would never last that long. The shields took another hit and alarms started screaming. Shield integrity at 40%. The computer announced switching from poetry to useful information. One more direct hit and we are exposed, Kyle said. Lyra looked at Ember, who had landed back on the dashboard. The small dragon stared at her with those glowing eyes, and something passed between them without words. Lyra stood up in her seat. I have an idea, she said, but you must trust me completely. Kyle twisted the ship to avoid another volley of weapons fire. At this point I will trust anything, he said. Lyra nodded. Open the airlock, she said. Kyle stared at her. That will kill us, he said. Not if you do it quickly, she said. Ember needs to get outside. Kyle looked at the tiny dragon that was no bigger than a house cat. What is a dragon that small going to do against 3 armed ships? He asked. Lyra smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. Despite her young appearance, Ember is not always small, she said. Dragons can change their size when needed, but it requires space to grow. Real space, not the cramped interior of a ship, Kyle wanted to argue. But another blast hit the shields, and the integrity dropped to 20%. The next hit would breach the hull. He made a decision based on instinct and desperation. Hold on to something, he shouted. He slammed his hand on the airlock control. The inner door opened, and Ember shot through it like a missile. The outer door opened, and the dragon disappeared into space. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The pirate ships closed in, preparing for the final strike. Then Ember began to grow. The small dragon expanded like a star being born. Its body stretched and widened, and its wings spread, until they were each longer than Kyle's entire ship. Scales that had been the size of thumbnails became the size of Shield's eyes that had glowed like candles now burned like suns. The dragon that emerged was massive and ancient and terrifying. It moved through space with impossible grace, as if the vacuum was water and it was swimming. The pirates saw it and tried to turn away, but they were too close and moving too fast. Ember opened its mouth and breathed fire. Not normal fire, but cosmic fire that burned in the black, without oxygen, fire that was made of pure energy and ancient magic. The flames hit the lead pirate ship, and its shields evaporated like mist. The ship spun away helpless with its engines melted. The second ship tried to fire on Ember, but the dragon moved faster than something that large should be able to move. It wrapped around the ship and crushed it with claws the size of buildings. The third ship turned and ran, broadcasting distress signals. Ember let it go. The dragon turned back toward the rusty arrow. And Kyle felt a moment of fear, because how could something that massive tell friend from enemy? But Ember approached gently, and its enormous eyes showed recognition. It tapped the hull with one claw so softly that it did not even dent the metal. Then it began to shrink. The dragon compressed back down to its small size and flew to the airlock which Kyle had left open. Ember entered the ship and the doors closed behind it. The small dragon flew to Lyra and landed on her, shoulder-making satisfied chirping sounds. Kyle sat in his pilot seat with his hands shaking from adrenaline. That was amazing, he said. His voice sounded strange, even to himself. Lyra stroked Ember under the chin. Dragons are born small, but they contain greatness within them, she said. Ember showed you his true form because he trusts you. Most humans never see a dragon at full size. Kyle looked at the scanner. The 2 pirate ships were drifting, and the third was already too far away to matter. The battle was over. They had won. He started laughing because it was either that or collapse from stress. We just survived, he said. We actually survived. Lyra smiled at him. You have very good luck. Kyle Murphy, she said. Kyle shook his head. I have terrible luck, he said. Good. Luck would mean I never got into that situation in the first place. She tilted her head considering this. Perhaps, she said. But terrible luck that leads to survival, and new friends is better than good luck that leads to boredom. Ember chirped agreement. Kyle checked their course and saw they were still on track for Europa. The shields were damaged but holding, and the engines were running fine. 8 hours until they reached the Andromeda embassy. 8 hours until Lyra would be safe and he would get paid. 8 hours until this crazy adventure ended. He realized he did not want it to end. Flying alone had been his life for 5 years. Just him and his broken ship and his string of bad luck. But now the cockpit felt less empty with Lyra examining the controls, and Ember perched on the dashboard. "You know," Kyle said, "when we get to Europa and you are safe with your people, what will you do?" Lyra looked at him with those color-shifting eyes. "I will return home to my family," she said. "They will be very happy to see me alive." "And what will you do?" she asked. Kyle thought about going back to hauling packages alone, thought about the empty cockpit and the silence. "I will probably take another job," he said. "Find another package to deliver." Lyra was quiet for a moment. "What if," she said slowly, "instead of delivering packages you had passengers? What if someone needed a pilot to take them on adventures? Someone who appreciated your ship and your good heart? Despite your claims of bad luck." Kyle looked at her. "Are you offering me a job, princess?" She smiled. "I am offering you a chance," she said. "My mother has many needs for trustworthy pilots who can travel quietly and handle unusual situations, and Ember has decided he likes you, which is rare." Kyle looked at the small dragon, who chirped at him. He thought about it. A chance to keep flying but not alone anymore. A chance to have friends on his ship. A chance for his bad luck to maybe turn into something better. "All right," he said. "Let us get you home first. Then we can talk about chances." Lyra settled back in her seat looking satisfied. Ember curled up on the dashboard to sleep. Kyle flew toward Europa with something like hope building in his chest. 6 hours later, Kyle guided the rusty arrow through the outer traffic lanes of Europa, while Lyra pressed her face against the cockpit window, watching the ice moon grow larger with wonder, and Ember sat on her shoulder, making small, excited sounds. The emergency repairs Kyle had made to the shields were holding but barely, and the ship rattled every time he changed course. Europa Traffic Control hailed them with the usual questions about cargo and destination, and Kyle lied smoothly, saying he was carrying botanical samples for the research district because telling the truth would have led to hours of questioning and probably arrest. They cleared him for approach, and he angled toward the Royal District where crystal towers rose from the ice like frozen lightning. The Andromeda Embassy was the tallest structure visible even from orbit, with walls that seemed to shift colors in the light as they got closer. Kyle saw security checkpoints and patrol ships circling the area. "This is where things get complicated," he said. "The Embassy District has 3 security perimeters, and they scan every ship that enters. When they scan us, they will find that my cargo manifest does not match what I am actually carrying." Lyra looked thoughtful. "Can you contact them directly?" she asked. "Can you tell them that Princess Lyra of the Silver Woods is aboard and requests immediate clearance?" Kyle pulled up the communication system. "I can try," he said, "but they might think it is a trick. Do it anyway." Lyra said, "My people will recognize my quantum signature if they scan properly." Kyle opened a channel to Embassy Security. "This is Courier Vessel Rusty Arrow, requesting clearance to land," he said. "I am carrying Princess Lyra, who was kidnapped and requires immediate protection." There was a long pause. Then a new voice came through the speakers, cold and formal and speaking with an accent Kyle had never heard. "This is Commander Zara of the Andromeda Security Forces," the voice said. "If this is a false claim, you will be arrested and prosecuted. Stand by for quantum scan." A beam of blue light swept across the rusty arrow, and Kyle felt a tingling sensation pass through his body. Ember growled at the sensation, but Lyra just smiled. "They are reading my energy pattern," she explained. "Every member of the royal family has a unique signature." The light faded and there was another pause. Then the commander's voice returned, but now it sounded urgent. "Princess Lyra, we confirm your identity." The voice said, "Emergency escort is being dispatched. Remain on current trajectory and do not deviate." 4 sleek silver ships appeared around the rusty arrow, moving so fast, Kyle barely saw them coming. They formed a protective box around his ship and guided him toward a private landing platform near the embassy. Kyle had never received a military escort before, and he was not sure whether to be honored or terrified. Probably both, he decided. They landed on a platform that was carved from blue ice and reinforced with energy fields. The moment the rusty arrow touched down. Armed guards in silver armor surrounded the ship. Kyle powered down the engines and looked at Lyra. "This is where we say goodbye." "I think," he said. Lyra reached over and took his hand. "Come with me," she said. "I want you to meet my mother." Kyle shook his head. "I am just a courier. Princess, I do not belong in royal meetings." Ember flew from Lyra's shoulder to Kyle's and chirped insistently. The dragon clearly wanted him to come too. Lyra squeezed his hand. "You saved my life," she said. "You fought pirates for me. You trusted Ember when most humans would have been afraid. You belong wherever I say you belong." Kyle could not argue with that logic. He stood and followed her to the airlock. They stepped out onto the platform and were immediately surrounded by guards who scanned them with handheld devices. Commander Zara approached. She was tall even for an elf, with armor that looked like it was made from starlight, and weapons that hummed with contained energy. Her eyes swept over Kyle with obvious suspicion. "Princess Lyra," she said, bowing deeply. "Your mother has been informed of your rescue. She is waiting in the main hall." "And this human?" she asked, looking at Kyle. "This is Kyle Murphy," Lyra said. "He is the one who saved me. Without him, I would be in the hands of criminals." Commander Zara's expression did not soften. "We will need to question him about how the princess came to be in his cargo hold," she said. Kyle felt his stomach drop, because questioning by military security usually meant hours in a cell. Lyra stepped between them. "You will not question him like a criminal," she said with authority that seemed to echo in the air. "You will thank him and pay him, and then you will offer him work, if he wants it." Commander Zara looked like she wanted to argue, but she bowed again. "As you command, Princess," she said. They were escorted into the embassy through corridors that seemed to be made of light itself. Kyle kept expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, because couriers, like him, did not get escorted through royal palaces. They entered a massive hall where the walls were transparent, showing the stars beyond. At the far end stood a woman who made Lyra's glow look dim by comparison. She was taller than any elf Kyle had seen, and her presence filled the entire space. She wore robes that moved like liquid silver and a crown that seemed to be made of captured lightning, Queen Astra of the Silver Woods. Lyra broke away from the group and ran to her mother. They embraced, and Kyle saw tears on the queen's face. She had been truly afraid for her daughter. After a long moment, the queen released Lyra and looked toward Kyle. Her eyes were the same color-shifting pattern as her daughter's, but they held the weight of centuries. "You are the courier who saved my daughter," she said. Her voice was like music, but also like thunder. "Yes, Your Majesty," Kyle said. "Though mostly I just opened a box and then tried not to die." The queen smiled. "Modest," she said. "Lyra has told me through our mental link what you did. You fought when you could have fled. You trusted. When you could have doubted, you showed honor when many would have shown greed." Kyle did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The queen approached him, and despite his height, she seemed to tower over him. "What reward do you seek?" she asked. "I can give you wealth beyond measure. I can give you a new ship that makes yours look like scrap metal. I can give you titles and land on any world in the Andromeda colonies." Kyle thought about what he really wanted. He looked at Lyra, who was smiling at him. He looked at Ember, who was still perched on his shoulder. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to keep flying. But not alone anymore. I want to work for someone I trust. Someone who will send me on jobs that matter. Someone who will let me keep this small dragon who seems to like me." The queen looked surprised. Then she laughed, and the sound filled the hall with warmth. "You do not want treasure or glory," she said. "You want purpose and companionship. That is the answer of a wise soul." She gestured, and a guard brought forward a small crystal device. "This is a royal commission," she said. "It marks you as an agent of the Silver Woods. You will carry passengers and packages for our people. You will be paid well, and your ship will be repaired at our expense. And Ember has clearly chosen you as his second bonded companion, which is rare. The dragon may stay with you when Lyra returns home." Kyle took the crystal, feeling its weight. This was more than he had hoped. "For thank you, Your Majesty," he said. The queen nodded. Go rest, she said. Tomorrow we will discuss your first official assignment. And Kyle Murphy. Yes, Your Majesty. Welcome to the service of the Silver Woods. May your bad luck finally change. 2 weeks later, Kyle stood in the cargo bay of the Rusty Arrow, which no longer looked quite so rusty after the Andromeda engineers had spent days repairing every broken system, and Kyle had to admit the ship actually purred now instead of grinding and coughing its way through space. Ember sat on a new perch the engineers had installed near the pilot seat, cleaning his wings and occasionally puffing small flames at passing technicians who got too close. The dragon had grown comfortable with Kyle and now spent most of his time either on Kyle's shoulder or flying loops through the ship. The door opened and Princess Lyra entered carrying a small bag. She had returned home to the Silver Woods for a week to reunite with her family, but she had promised to visit before Kyle's first official mission. You came, Kyle said, smiling. Of course, Lyra said, climbing up to sit on a cargo crate. I wanted to see you off and to meet your first passenger. Kyle checked his datapad. The manifest said he was picking up someone named Dr. Helen Foster, who needed transport to a research station near Saturn. Just a simple run with one passenger, which seemed almost too easy after everything that had happened. That worries me, he said. Easy jobs always turn into complicated ones. Lyra laughed. You have not changed, she said, still expecting bad luck. Ember chirped and flew over to land on Lyra's shoulder, nuzzling against her cheek. The dragon had missed her. I am trying to be optimistic, Kyle said. But optimism and I have never been good friends. There was a knock on the hull and a woman's voice called out asking for permission. To board, Kyle opened the door. Dr. Helen Foster was not what he expected. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back, in a practical bun and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She wore a research uniform covered in pockets and carried 3 bags that looked heavy. She also had a large metal case that hummed softly. Hello, she said, looking around the cargo bay. Must be Kyle Murphy. This is quite a ship you have. Kyle helped her with the bags. Thank you, he said. She is old but reliable. This is Princess Lyra who is visiting, and this is Ember, my dragon. Helen stared at Lyra with wide eyes. You are actually a princess, she said. I thought that was just a title. Lyra smiled. I am quite real, she said. And you are a scientist. Helen nodded, still looking amazed. I study quantum biology, she said. Specifically, how living things interact with space-time at the molecular level. It is very boring to most people. It sounds fascinating. Lyra said. Kyle loaded Helen's bags and secured the metal case which the doctor said contained sensitive equipment that absolutely could not be jostled or exposed to temperature changes. No problem, Kyle said. I am very careful with cargo now. He did not mention that his carefulness came from having previously transported a kidnapped princess. They said goodbye to Lyra, who hugged Kyle and whispered that she would visit again. Soon Ember chirped, sadly as she left, but Kyle promised the dragon they would see her again. Helen settled into the passenger cabin, which the engineers had upgraded with actual padding on the seats and working air filters. Kyle returned to the cockpit and began the launch sequence. The ship lifted off smoothly, and he felt a sense of pride because everything was working exactly as it should. They cleared Europa's traffic control and set course for Saturn. 5 days of travel through the outer system. Kyle engaged the autopilot and went back to check on his passenger. Helen had unpacked her equipment and was setting up what looked like a small laboratory in the passenger cabin. You mind if I work during the flight, she asked. My research cannot wait, not at all, Kyle said. What exactly are you researching? Helen adjusted her glasses and her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I am studying the effects of faster-than-light travel on cellular aging, she said. When we jump through hyperspace, our bodies experience time differently than normal space. I believe this is causing subtle changes at the genetic level. Kyle had never thought about that. So traveling through space is changing us, he said. In small ways. Yes, Helen said. Nothing dangerous. But I want to understand. Yeah, that is actually interesting, Kyle said. Helen smiled. Most couriers just want to know when they can drop me off and leave. She said, You are the first one who has asked questions. Kyle shrugged. "I have a lot of time alone in space," he said. "Interesting conversations are rare." They talked for another hour about her research and Kyle's adventures, and by the time he returned to the cockpit, he felt like he had made a new friend. The first 3 days of the journey passed without incident. Kyle was starting to think maybe his luck really had changed. Then on the 4th day, the proximity alarm started beeping. Kyle checked the scanner and saw a ship approaching fast from behind. It was not broadcasting any identification, and it was moving directly toward them. As stomach sank, Helen came to the cockpit. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Maybe," Kyle said, "or maybe my bad luck just caught up with me again." The ship hailed them and a face appeared on the screen. It was a man with scars and cold eyes. "Courier vessel," he said. "You are carrying Dr. Helen Foster, who has stolen property belonging to the Titan Research Collective. Surrender her immediately, or we will take her by force." Helen went pale. "They found me," she whispered. Kyle looked at her. "What did you steal?" he asked. Helen took a deep breath. "I did not steal anything," she said. "I discovered that the collective was conducting illegal experiments on human subjects. I took evidence to expose them. Now they want to silence me." Kyle looked at the scanner. The ship chasing them was bigger and faster. Ember, who had been sleeping on the dashboard, woke up and growled. Sensing danger, Kyle made a decision. "Hold on," he said to Helen. He cut the communication and pushed the throttle forward. The rusty arrow accelerated hard and Helen grabbed a seat. "What are you doing?" she asked. "What I do best," Kyle said. "Running away from trouble." The pursuing ship fired a warning shot that streaked past them. Kyle twisted the ship into evasive maneuvers. "You cannot outrun them," Helen said. She sounded terrified. "No," Kyle said, "but I can try to reach Saturn Station before they catch us. The station has security." Ember launched from the dashboard and flew to the airlock door. The dragon scratched at the controls. "Not this time," Kyle said. "We are not in deep space. If you go full size near Saturn Station, you will cause a panic." Ember made a frustrated sound but settled back down. The chase continued for 2 hours. Kyle flew better than he ever had, using every trick he knew. But the pursuing ship was gaining. They were still an hour from Saturn Station when the enemy ship got close enough to lock weapons. Kyle saw the targeting indicator light up on his screen. This was it. He had survived pirates and rescues and royal meetings, but he could not outrun corporate mercenaries in a cargo ship. Then Helen stood up. "I have an idea," she said. She went to her metal case and opened it. Inside was equipment Kyle did not recognize. "What is that?" he asked. "Quantum displacement device." Helen said, "It is experimental." "What does it do?" Kyle asked it. "Creates a temporary bubble of altered space-time." She said, "Anyone inside the bubble becomes temporarily out of phase with normal space, invisible and untouchable for about 10 seconds. Kyle stared at her. "That sounds like science fiction," he said. "It is science fact," Helen said, "but it has only been tested in laboratory conditions, never on a moving ship, never with living subjects this large. We could die." She added, "Or we could be caught." Kyle said. Helen nodded. She activated the device. The cargo bay filled. With blue light, Kyle felt a strange sensation like falling and floating at the same time. Everything went silent. The alarms stopped. The engine sound faded. Through the cockpit window, Kyle could see the enemy ship firing, but the weapons passed through. The rusty arrow like they were firing at a ghost. 10 seconds later, the sensation ended. The sounds returned. Kyle checked the scanner. The enemy ship had flown past them, unable to see where they had gone. Helen collapsed into the co-pilot seat, breathing. "Hard that worked," she said. "It actually worked." Kyle was laughing. "You saved us," he said. Helen smiled. "You saved me first," she said. "Now we are even." They reached Saturn Station safely, and Helen turned over her evidence to authorities who promised to investigate. The Titan Research Collective. Kyle waited with her until security confirmed she would be protected. Before she left, she shook his hand. "Thank you, Kyle," she said. "You are a good man." Kyle watched her go, then returned to his ship where Ember was waiting him. Dragon chirped questioningly. "We survived," Kyle told him. Again, he sat in the pilot seat and looked at his datapad. There was already a message from Queen Astra with his next assignment. Another passenger who needed discreet transport. Kyle smiled. Maybe bad. Luck was just what happened when you were in the right place to help people. Maybe he had been looking at it wrong all along. Ember settled on his shoulder. Kyle powered up the engine's time to fly.